We're in the welcome to synchronized window dancing. Here. Maybe I can get rid of that now. Maybe I can get rid of that now. What up, y'all? I don't know if you can see me and or hear me. I don't know if YouTube has just abandoned their concept of a service. I think that's what's happening. Kind of like what happened to Hangouts, but it's just sort of growing moss on it. So we might be facing the end days. This could be the end days of YouTube. Like OBS does not work anymore. Even the latest updates, YouTube is just like, don't work. And that's okay. What's up, Kyle Royal? Digalicious. And Kaya Endo. Dan McIntyre. Hey, everybody. File on in, will you? Nice to see everybody. Welcome back to the old internet. It's Ingrid Bernal here, back once again. Yes, I complain about it every time, don't I? So need to find some new way. And, if we start streaming somewhere else, I'll do my very best to reach everybody, because I know that thousands of you are here on YouTube and look for alerts from me here on YouTube when it's time to talk about cool stuff. What's up, Kylie, Flickering Torch, Richard, and my talk. Yo, Dyson, Ruben, how you doing? Yeah, so if you see me post something up on like the sort of discussion page of YouTube, I know that page isn't the coolest. What up? I'm right here. But yeah, when this day comes, and I think it's going to come very soon, it is 2021. It's time to upgrade. The era of YouTube for me is just decaying. Hey, Royal, I appreciate that, man. I'm really trying to move on over to Instagram. So if if Instagram Live can do a long format, we might wind up doing this whole thing on Instagram. I don't know. Like, one problem with Instagram, you can't watch it on your computer. You can only watch it on your phone. So that makes for like a small format. Discord is a vastly smaller group of people than YouTube for Runehammer. Vastly, vastly smaller. It's something like 300-ish rather than 40,000-ish. So, yeah, and Twitch has a weird feeling to it. So I just don't know what we're going to do, man. But just YouTube just does not work anymore. So I apologize that this tonight's stream is a camera looking at a screen. See, look, I'm right here. Kind of like my drawing streams. I tried my damnedest to get a screen share set up, but for some reason, YouTube no longer will let you do screen share on live streaming. So you have to use another thing, and none of them work. And just like, wow. So anyways, I just don't know what my destiny is with live streaming and with using YouTube. It's a great way to reach a lot of people, but dang if I'm not just bad at it. So we'll just see where it's going. And that is enough of that crap. We're going to go into Infinite Land here for a second. Oh, great. 65 of you. Welcome, everybody. All right. Hey, everybody. What's up? So we're going to figure all that out in the coming months because it is 2021. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope you're all still surviving and taking care of each other, being kind to your neighbor, making this planet a better place despite whatever form of craziness may be occurring in your neck of the woods. So let's just block all that garbage out for a second and talk about the stuff that matters, which is our glorious hobby where we all stick together and don't hurt a fly and just have a good time. You know what I mean? So, Centurio, I think for uploading YouTube is still pretty cool, but man, oh man. Okay, so let's just forget about all that stuff. Centurio, I agree, man. It's like pretty crazy what's going on. It's kind of, it started as being like grassrootsy nano, and it's kind of like wishing it was a TV station or something. I don't know what's going on. We're going to figure out something. It's going to be okay. Max, I don't know. Everybody asks me that right at the beginning if I'm going to archive something. I have no idea. Probably, yes. I hope this will be archived. So since this will be archived, let's get through this boring introduction. This is only going to take about 45 minutes or so, but basically I want to walk you guys through the sort of adventure that I did in the second half of 2020. And I tried to edit this into a video. I tried to put music to it. I tried all these different things. I just couldn't make it make sense in a way that was easy to talk through. And so I just decided to straight up roll right here on the live stream. This is all about Warmaker. Warmaker is my journey that started last summer and concluded right around the beginning of December. And it's been getting into a lot of people's hands, and there's some excitement and some curiosity about it. And I just wanted to show you guys more so the story, less than talk about the sort of product. Um, and the story really is what Warmaker is all about. So it all began when I was futzing around, getting into miniature building, as maybe you guys saw in the past, and just started getting interested in wargaming. And the more I looked into like Sigmar and Warhammer and other things that were out there, they just didn't fit my style. I couldn't remember all these complex rules. It sounded sort of scary and intimidating, and like I felt like a beginner and an outsider, and I just felt like So I started just sort of tinkering with my own idea of maybe I can make a war game. So everything that you're going to see here is this journey that I took, and I really wanted to do two things. I wanted to make my own wargaming system that was kind of based on some of the greatest elements of other wargaming systems, and I also wanted to make a ton of miniatures, and I wanted to publish a book where all the art in the book was made exclusively with miniatures. And so that's what I set out to do. So here is the story of Warmaker. So Warmaker started out, and it's really was just lots of piles of plastic. And so you're not going to see all of these images in chronological order, but what I'm going to do is almost just sort of talk through these images, almost like like a vacation slideshow. Centurio, you're going to see here in the next few minutes, like Warmaker is about all kinds of different stuff. That is the whole idea. And so I think you'll get a little bit of elbow, and hopefully you'll get some variable scale wargaming engine going on here. So this image right here is a tank kit that I had. I also had a Dungeons and Lasers terrain sort of kit, and just had lots of plastic laying around to tear apart. So one of the first things that you guys saw me do was work on my Fire Slayers army. So these are my Fire Slayers when they were painted and they were complete on some nice UDT from Professor Dungeon Master. But everything you're seeing here is custom, as you're going to see ahead. And you guys may have seen some of my streams in the past, but so much stuff was custom, and I didn't realize how crazy I was going to go with things being custom. This was just the tip of the iceberg. So this is a sort of a close-up. I did single miniature photography to make all the art in the book, in the Warmaker book. So this is an example of just a single miniature photo that later I would process into book art. But these are these sort of twin shield guys and some custom basing that I did. Also, in the whole project, I was goofing around with cardboard terrain. As many of you guys know, I had to leave my entire terrain collection, which is just massive, back in Washington when I moved to Philly. And so I've been looking for fun, economical, compact ways to kind of goof around with terrain. And so I was getting into this sort of cardboard style. So here was a moment that I was building my Fire Slayers, and the more I played around with having a sort of big group of 30 some dwarves, I really wanted to have them battle a dragon. And then what better to go along with a dragon than a bunch of xenomorphs? And this moment really was one of the moments that it started to dawn on me that I wanted to make a system all my own. I didn't know how to approach this problem. I didn't see a system out there that encouraged me or gave me simple tools to make a rule system for a battle. I wanted to battle all my dwarves versus a giant dragon with xenomorphs. And this is how Warmaker really started taking shape, is I wanted a system that could do that wide of a variety. So here again, you have a close-up, and this shows a little bit how far afield I wound up going. I wound up making 6 total armies. And this was the sort of the sci-fi sort of military army that I made. And these photos, remember, these are the photos that I used to create the art in the book. So I was doing these cardboard backdrops and also using a speaker to get this sort of gray tones and circular shapes. And then I would process this later into making the art in the book. So these are, again, all custom. These little shields and boxes and the bases that they have are all made from other kits, and some of them sculpted by hand, as you'll see in a minute here. So here again are more of these close-ups of these custom miniatures. So one of my setups is a bunch of Vietnam GIs battling these bug monsters. And so I had to not only create all the miniatures for that concept of a scenario, but then come up with a rules hacking sort of system and take the photography all sort of in this sort of storm of creativity I was going through. All right, so here you see the Fire Slayers army completely built, getting ready to prime. And so, kind of the most interesting thing here is like all these bases are made from Dungeons and Lasers terrain kit. So I used a pair of pliers to rip up a plastic terrain kit to make these sort of brick bases that these guys. And here they're getting ready to be primed here. So these are the reptoids. So I also made a sort of reptile army. And you guys may recognize some of these old lizardmen figures from the Reaper collection, but I ordered a huge lot of Warhammer guns off of eBay and cut the weapons off of these lizardmen and replaced them with Warhammer guns. So I basically had a huge reptilian army all armed with sci-fi weaponry. Here's one of the moments when I really realized that I wanted to do xenomorphs versus dwarves. Something about this personal confrontation right here is just, it was just too much. It was too cool. I was just like, I don't have a rule system that's going to let me easily play this little confrontation out. But this felt cool. You know, imagine a bunch of xenomorphs getting inside, you know, a dwarven undermountain, and then the dwarves battling the xenomorphs. I just thought, man, that's so freaking cool. I want to make that happen. And this is sort of what gave rise to Warmaker. So another part of Warmaker is that it uses the old skull dice that me and Cyrus Draken developed years ago, which are just binary dice. So they're either hit or miss dice, with a maximum of 6 in a roll. And you guys can grab the PDF on DriveThruRPG if you really want to get into the mechanics. But this was the simple sort of dice system that I wanted to use to make this stuff happen. I know that a lot of wargamers get into, you know, +2 and +3 and then quality and roll quality and, you know, looking at all the numbers on the rolls. I just didn't want to do it. I wanted to sort of play it out simpler, and you guys will see a little bit of the experiments that I did to find this kind of dice mechanic that made it all start to work. So here you see a finished screen capture of some of the art in the book. And I think this is actually some of the early writing. So some of this has been updated and there might be some typos here. So don't look too closely. But here, if we kind of come in a little bit, so you can see like this right here, that is a photo of a miniature. This is a photo of 3 miniatures. And so that's what I mean by using my miniature art to actually create the art in the book. And it's basically just a combination of using a cutout filter with a lot of sort of careful settings in Photoshop, and then doing lots of hand painting on each image to get it this kind of painted look. So here is when I'm, looks like just after priming on my sci-fi military group. And so you can see in this extreme close-up, I also did custom work on the military. So I took little pieces of my tank model and made little radios and little extra weapon bits and little chunky items to make my army look more sci-fi, because they were originally a World War II army. So in some ways, they still have like those World War II helmets, but I put little bits of tech on them to give them this sort of slightly higher tech look. And here's my Vietnam guys. You guys will recognize these from Warhammer. But again, I kind of modified them slightly, changed some of their guns, and then did some of this basing. I also did some of this tall basing where these are hand sculpted to get these commander type characters. And in the background here, you can see some of my test materials, which we're about to look at, I think. Yeah, so here's my sci-fi blue helmet army versus the reptoids. And so you can see how I started finding my way into real battle scenarios, and I'm kind of playing these out and also taking photos while I'm playing. And then these photos start processing into the book, and then also looking for scenarios. I wanted to do like a last stand scenario where these GI sci-fi soldiers are standing against this huge reptoid army. And this is how this stuff all started to sort of come together. Love this photo too, because this is in my little sound stage that I wound up creating, my little photo stage. You know what, Kimball Mojimble, I don't know if there are copyright issues on using photos, but not a single miniature that I used was photographed as purchased. They're all modified in some way. Either limbs are removed, equipment is added, and so on and so forth. Plus, all the paint and all the photography is done exclusively by me. So I really don't think I'm worried about issues in that area. I don't think I'm doing any sort of IP wrong to the property holders. If anything, I think I'm honoring them, and they're all credited in the book. So if you take a look at Warmaker, every single manufacturer that created any element that I used to make all this stuff is credited. Oh, look at this one. This is fun. So I made a tank here you're going to see up ahead, but I made a custom tank, and I made it so custom, I actually had to build the entire drivetrain just from spare pieces of plastic I had laying around. So you can see here I'm building the base of the tank, building the drivetrain. And I'm using some mouse guard dice to actually hold this thing up while the glue is drying. But this is the base of the sort of sci-fi tank that I built. So this is one of the moments that I really occurred to me. I wanted to build a simple measurement system. One thing with wargaming is you're always seeing the sort of like rulers coming out and like, measurement templates and stuff. And I just can't deal with that. I'm a person that have a ton of pencils laying around in my workshop. And so I just thought, what if everybody just sort of moves one pencil unless they're fast, and then maybe they move two pencils, something simple. And then this scenario, I had a dwarf being chased by a xenomorph. And I really started seeing that like using a pencil as a measurement system was really fun, and just kind of leaning into it and having fun, like with a sort of kid brain and just playing in my room. So one of the sort of parts of the sci-fi set is that the army has these battle suits that back them up, and so I just use Gundams, Gunpla 144 kits. But again, I started modifying the kits. So here I've attached some tanks. I changed some of the ways that articulation works, and I changed the weaponry, and I left a lot of pieces out, and then basically applied a lot of plastic cement to the joints. So I got a stiff pose. You don't want to be using posable articulated figures in wargaming because they'll wiggle as you pick them up and put them down. And yeah, I do think that Games Workshop is protective of their IP, but I really don't think that they have been taken or wronged in any way here. There's been massive modification to the few Fire Slayers that are shown. And if they do have an issue with it, that's okay. But to me, that is really not the focus of this talk. Okay. So yeah, you'll see more of these Gunpla going forward here. Aha. So now I didn't want to just use the Xeno Dragon as it had been built, again, because of what you guys are talking about, the sort of originality component. So I took a hacksaw and sawed the whole front half of the Xeno Dragon off and sculpted this xenomorph head. And you'll see some more photos coming up of how I did the sculpt on the head. But this is getting the sculpt completed and sort of seeing them together before I did the priming. So during the course of making these custom lizard men, I had to do a lot of sort of oddball gluing, and especially gluing plastic to metal. What a pain in the butt that is. And so I made this ball of Sculpey, which they would prop their weapons on while the glue would dry. So that's just a technique that maybe might come in handy. Here's an extreme close-up on some of the little Vietnam guys. And another technique that I used to customize my miniatures was taking a bunch of extra weapons and just gluing them onto their backpacks so that they're way over-equipped from what you might see as a sort of a typical build of the kit. Well, my design philosophy, Ajax, is exactly what I'm talking about. I looked and I read almost all the war games I could stand, looking for something that was a fit. And also trying to just do my research, but I also wanted to use the fact that I was new to wargaming as a mine. I wanted to use that as a source of inspiration rather than as come at it from a point of expertise. My newness in this case was an asset, not a liability, and I wanted to play with that because having a hard time learning war games in the beginning is something I wanted to solve, and so me being a beginner was part of what I was, going after. So here we have some lichen and some moss for my basing to get a jungle feel. So here are the fire slayers. And again, this is why I'm not worried about, like sort of IP ownership, because every single one of these shields is made by hand. These are all handmade from various kits from all over the place, and little bits of plastic that are cut with pliers and leaving parts off and taking parts from places that you have no business taking them. And like there are no other miniatures that look like this. These are completely my creation, and the tedium that it took to create these is how I feel so confident about it. It took hours to make these shields, just the shields alone, much less all the little fake arms that are hidden behind the shields and so on and so forth. But this is just a primer and a little bit of white dry brush to get some highlights before I put on my paint. Here we see my flamethrower guys. So again, this is a custom job in that I built the sort of tanks on his back out of little bits from some other kit. I think from the Dungeons and Lasers kit. So here's where you see a little bit now of the miniatures starting to live with my cardboard terrain. So on the one hand, this is kind of neat because you can really feel the scale of this being miniature, but also this is, photography that will be processed into the art. So the flat brown color on the cardboard is something that when you're translating it into a painting really starts working some magic. And I took really hundreds of these photos to get the focus and right and stuff, because when you go to start processing them, you'll find really almost all your photos do not work well to process into sort of a painting look. You really need a very specific kind of lighting and depth of focus and stuff to get it right. And it just took me forever to get it right. These gas mask guys here are slightly custom, but they're from the Hellboy board game. So miniatures and bits of miniatures coming from all over the place. So here is the first run that I took at a system used mouse guard dice. I love mouse guard dice mainly just for their feel. They're probably the highest quality dice that I know of. Gaming, yeah, in a casual way, but I really don't have interest in working at any company of any form. I really think companies are a 20th century creation. I think that the 21st century is much more about nano business and creators and cottage business. The idea of companies and corporations to me is, I hope will become a little bit outdated. So anyways, here I was using a direction dice and some coins and of course the beloved Ticonderoga to start sort of design my system. Here we see a complete view of the Krell Army. So this is all the military guys and their two battle suits that accompany them. And so what you're going to see here is these two gunpla kits, but they have custom weaponry, custom paint, and then a lot of weathering because I wanted them to have as much reality as my miniatures did. And normally gunpla kits, like Gundam kits, they're very colorful and they don't necessarily have that grit that I like in a lot of my miniatures. So not only did I do the weathering and the paint, but I also used the same shader inks which come with Army Painter. You use these shader inks which will dig into the cavities of your miniatures to give them a lot of contrast. I use those inks on my gunpla, which in my knowledge is very rarely done in the hobby, except on really custom gunpla kits. And so you're going to see some close-ups here too about how those turned out. Here's building the insect army, which I made by tearing apart Umber Hulks. So I bought like 24 Umber Hulks and then promptly threw away like half their legs and only used their arms. And then also didn't put their heads on. I only put their jaws onto their necks. So you're seeing like, if you can see my pointer right here, these are the jaws of the Umber Hulk where the head's supposed to go, but I didn't put the head on. So it just goes neck to jaw. And that's what I think it gave them this really inhuman kind of scary look, which is they don't really have a head. They just go right to the jaws. And this is the construction phase on those. It's called the Ceropods. Here we're back to some of the dwarves and the close-ups on doing these sort of double shield jobs. This was before I was going quite as wild with going custom. So just the construction phase there, gluing them together. Oh, this is great. So here you actually see my photo sort of sound stage, or my little sort of stage. And so I have lights on like bendy mounts. and this sort of spray painted cardboard backing piece. And this is my junked kit for those of you who are sort of junked players. There are also car combat rules in Warmaker, and so I needed to get some photos to create the car combat art. So I got my junked kit out, and you can see that down here. But this is just a fun picture that really reveals what it was like in my workshop taking these photos. I got my handy glue gun like right over here and like cords everywhere and my sound equipment, and just like, this is really a glimpse into my life right here. What a nightmare. So here's I think one of the opening pieces of art in Warmaker is this picture turned into a painting. I was so happy with this photo. So this is my custom built tank, and I mean custom with a capital C. Like, I used very little from the actual tank kit. I made all this stuff by hand and did this paint job and got that metallic look on the tank. And it's sitting on my work cardboard just to me, this look is just too dope. Like, I really am proud of this. The feel of this. Yeah, I have played Gaslands. It's a little too detailed for me. And you know, another part of why I created Junked and created the car combat rules in Warmaker is Gaslands is just very detail oriented, at least for my flavor. You know, there's plenty of room for everybody's style. I believe just like everybody have fun. Here's a close-up of one of my early tests where the dwarves actually beat the xenomorphs in this test. And so I know that these photos in some cases aren't like that well planned or executed, but they're also just me right in the middle of playtesting and taking notes. Oh yeah, Metal Slug all the way. No, I mean, everything's off camera to the left here, Torch, but I wasn't going to sort of swing my camera around my room. I really wanted to show you sort of the journey. And Omega D actually tilt shift completely destroys the paint creation process. So I couldn't use any of those techniques. Here is the finished paint on the Ceropods. They turned out much more red than I wanted them to be, but when you feel those colors starting to come into their own, if you don't want to start all over with primer, you just kind of got to go with it. Still, they look great, like in person. I really am happy with how they came out. Here's post primer on the Krell Army. Just a close up where you can see these shoulder pads here. Those are pieces of armor from I think an old fighter plane kit that had a little bunker that came with it, and I tore that bunker apart to do these little bits. A close up on the two-tone primer on some of these characters, and so you can see, like, especially on the barrel of the flamethrower here, the top of the barrel is white and the rest is gray, and you do a top-down white primer. This really works because acrylic paints are translucent, and so if you put a lot of extra effort into your primer, you get a lot more 3D look when you go to color paint. Here's a really fun close-up on the Reptoid Army. I really like this photo. It also has a strange, like almost aged feel to the photo, just on accident. But showing some of the basic technique of basically I paint a lot of my guns just pure black, and then I dry brush them with silver to get this kind of, you know, almost Giger-esque kind of feel to how I like my guns to look. I don't like bright, colorful guns. I like them black with silver highlights, just really straight up and simple. Love these old Reaper miniatures. They're so cool, man. I love their faces and stuff. So this is a pretty funny one. This is a glimpse inside the real life of a miniature hacker. So this is when I was building the tank, and like this whole muzzle on the tank, these little braces, all this stuff is custom. And I had the tank instructions underneath here so I could build this hatch right up here properly. It's just this is a funny glimpse into what it really feels like when you're doing this stuff. Yeah, spikes on helmets really give you like a Kaiser Wilhelm type of feel, Patrick. So that didn't really work out. I didn't want to mess with that. You know, if you mess with the helmet, you can really mess up the sort of impact of a character. Like too much helmet can look kind of silly. And too small of a helmet can look like a bicycle helmet. So you got to be careful with that. And I still think that World War II helmets have a timeless look. This is just a finished photo of the Fire Slayers army, all hacked up, what I called the shield dwarves. And this was really one of the moments where I said, I want to do a lot more of this and I want to build my own engine and I want to go crazy with it. I also had gotten, the big magma monster that comes with the Fire Slayers from Warhammer. I actually just chopped it into pieces and never built it. And all those little pieces are used to make armor bits that are all over these dwarves. This is a funny close-up of just one single xenomorph drone, just to give you an idea of how stinking tiny these things are. And also probably a photo that I used to create some of the in-game, the book in the art. And yeah, that's a UDT that Professor DM made for me and delivered in person when we had a bunch of beers this summer. He's a great guy. So here's more of my cardboard terrain, as I showed earlier, just kind of fun to make. So remember my Xeno Dragon from earlier. This is my first stage at sculpting on the Xeno Dragon. So I sculpted the head and the jaw, and then the teeth here. What I did is I made a lot of these little sculpty triangles and baked them in the oven, and then shoved them into the still soft sculpty, and then baked the whole thing. And that way you don't mess up your teeth. You get really nice jagged teeth. Because, such tiny things, even using tweezers, it's really hard to do really sharp teeth. So that's a technique. You can have different phases of baking on your Sculpey to keep some forms rigid. So here's another look at the sort of the photography stage, so to speak, of getting set up for that Krell Army photo that you saw earlier. Here's a sort of a group shot of the Vietnam force that you've been seeing a few shots of here and there. A couple of them I did face paint on them, like Predator style, and wanted to try to just be original with how I presented these guys in my own way. Here's the Fire Slayers at priming. It really I'm sure everyone out there who builds miniatures, it's so fun to see how they look right when you prime them. They look so cool. There's a magic moment out in the sunlight when your primer dries and they just look badass. So here was a playtest where I took sort of part of my special forces unit and split them off and tried to see what it was like to battle like a higher grade, higher tier enemy with a lower tier enemy. And in this case, they got decimated. The Sauropods just killed these guys quickly, and just all part of that tuning and creation and playtest process. And by the way, if you're interested, the PDF for Warmaker is super affordable. I try to keep my prices as low as possible. You can jump over to Drive-Thru RPG and just search Warmaker and tell me what you think. And if you can't spare the 5 ducats for it, just email me and I can maybe sneak you a freebie copy. So here's another one of these shots where I was starting to really get excited. And I knew that the idea of Dwarves versus Xenos was something fun. Something here just made me happy, and I knew I was onto something. So more of that sort of playtesting stuff, just clashing these two forces. Here's just a look at the book itself. So I have one sitting right here. So here's the book itself right here. It's a little dim in here, but this is the book. So it came out very colorful, and you can see how everything I'm talking about here in the stream kind of comes through in the book. There's also some inked art for the map creation and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, this is a shot of the interior art of the book where you can see how that paint style kind of overtakes the photos. Oh yeah, the Mark of Valor. Thanks, Richard. That's one of my favorite things too. Why would you want to reward your opponent in a war game? Because you're cool. That's why. So here is the very first stage of doing the custom paint on the Gunpla suits. And so this is one of those moments where you're doing this paint and you're probably saying to yourself like, oh man, yeah, could somebody provide a link? That'd be great. Junked absolutely affected my Warmaker process, Caleb. Absolutely. Like, I love doing miniature art, and I see it maybe as art, like I want to do my miniatures in sort of my way, and I want to document it and accent it in my way. And this is one of those moments doing these Gunplas where the paint job just looks totally awful. It's just like, man, what am I doing? This is just bad. It looks so flat and terrible. But I did their interiors black, you can see, and then the exterior plating, different colors and stuff. But then you get the washes on and you do your dry brushing and you really get an amazing look. So sometimes when you're being creative like this, you just got to keep the faith when you feel like your stuff looks nasty. Just keep going and keep working it. Here's a close up of those gas maskers from the Hellboy game board game on their bases with their lichen and everything. I imagine them, kind of like the like the CIA sort of shows up and they got these crazy gas masks and stuff. Here's another attempt at that same shot you saw before. And so certain setups, I would have lots of different photos so that I would get the one that would respond with my paint process the best. Also, if you take a closer look here, you can see something funny. This Reptoid right here has a Warhammer arm as his arm, like an armored arm, because I didn't have a left arm that would work. And so that's just another reminder of just really how hand built a lot of these miniatures were. Here's the tank starting to come together. I think primed too, but I hadn't figured out how to do the treads quite yet. So you're seeing like that kind of Metal Slug type look with some sci-fi bits kind of, attached on. And it's still the turret moves and the muzzle goes up and down and stuff. This was a huge moment in playtesting. This is very early on. So I have my Paizo dragon back there versus all my dwarves. And I wanted that to be exciting. I wanted one dragon versus a bunch of dwarves to somehow work. And that to me was a challenge that I didn't know if I knew of a war game that did that. And I wanted to play with that and have this dragon take on like 20 dwarves and see if I can make it happen. Hey, Ignacio, what's up, my man? So here, this is a little bit blurry from moving the camera, but these are pieces of oven-baked Sculpey that are the bases for the Krell Army. So I would just roll out a big mass, a log of Sculpey, and then slice it into pieces and bake it. And it winds up looking like these sort of big flat masses of rock. Works really well, especially if you overcook your Sculpey a little bit. It will sort of turn dark like this and start looking a lot like rock. Here's the good old Fire Slayers again with a couple of custom miniatures by Atris Miniatures mixed in. And look at the close-up on these guys. These are from Bolt Action. They made this army, and then I've customized it. But here you can see the pieces of rock that I just showed, the sort of hand-cut rock bases that all these guys have. Just funny taking... I mean, the camera's like 2 inches from it in this photo. Excuse me. And you can absolutely make coins that way. It takes a little bit of care, but you can absolutely make coins that way. It's how I make a lot of my bases. Here's a close-up on a single Sauropod that wound up in the book. So you can see that kind of jaw without a head kind of look that's kind of wild. And I also did some custom work down here where I drilled a little hole, and then I would glue the single claw into the hole to get a really sturdy mount since so little of him is touching the ground. I wanted them to look really dynamic, like they're coming in fast. And that means you need a sturdy, small mount. Here is an extreme close-up of some of my shield dwarves. This one a little more standard to their build, except for the 2 shields. But just really like how those came out. Again, more of those guys, custom shield, custom hammer, all that good stuff. Here was an experiment I did with some really extreme lighting, and it wound up really not working. So, part of finding stuff that works is finding lots of stuff that doesn't. More of this test, especially taking this sort of juggernaut. So I took an orc miniature from Warhammer and then put a dwarf head inside of it instead and some other custom parts and built a custom base and stuff. I wanted to see how long he could last against some Xenos. This is before they got their paint. Close-ups on the Krell Army with the paint done. So you remember how bad that paint looked on the mech before, and then how cool it comes out here. It's like that's why you really got to persevere sometimes. And you can see how customized these World War II guys are. The Xenomorphs came from the AVP board game. More close-ups of the Sauropods. No, I didn't do really any filtering. The photos just go right into Photoshop and are processed with a cutout. And then I just take a paintbrush and just by hand work it into an image that I like. Here's one of the very first images where I was just starting to tear apart plastic and start gluing things, just randomly gluing things and wondering where this was all headed. This is an image that wound up not being used in the book, but just a wild close-up from my junked kit with some sort of more extreme lighting. Trying to get this sort of junked kind of you're down there on the street look. It's pretty wild. Like the texture on the ground is really fun. But just wound up the lighting being a little too extreme to work with the processing. Yeah, I do all the art for OPR, Erixus. All that illustrations are mine. OPR is a fantastic system. Here's a little bit of a shelfie. There's a bit of a shadow in this photo, but here you can see a comparison. So you have the Vietnam custom tank army, you have the Fire Slayer, shield dwarf army, the Sauropods, and then the Xeno Dragon army there, and you can kind of see them hanging out on my shelf. So you get again like that sense of scale and quantity is really fun. More play tests, figuring out pencil distance and movement, and looks like two xenomorphs having their way with a group of dwarves. I think we saw this one already. Here's this little group primed. Oh boy, so the more I got into using a pencil, I really started loving pencils. And some of the Warmaker book has some camouflage motifs here and there, and so I actually treated myself and I made a pack of custom pencils. I got 20 camouflage pencils with the Warmaker logo like on them, so I could use Warmaker pencils. That's when you're having a really good time, right? So this is the elite or the commander that I did for my reptile army, and really happy here. So you can see how much custom work is done. He's got a chain sword from like an Astartes. He's got like a bazooka thing, which came, I think, from a tank kit, and then a hand sculpted base. So he's a lot bigger and heavier and taller. He's got a tail that's hand sculpted. And then sort of this sort of monochrome paint job that I was having fun with. So you get just a different look, and it's just so fun to do this stuff. Here's setting up some of the raw pieces that came together for the tank. Again, more of that really early phase testing of working with a different dragon, my own hand sculpted dragon from a couple years back. In this moment of thinking, wow, I might be kind of onto something neat here. So here's the these Reptoid runners. So you may recognize this, but the custom elements here is that there are no front legs on these like hunter things. They're also meant to have like these bridles on them, and I left that off, and then hand sculpted a little rocky base for them. So I got these like bipedal reptile things, and they just really looked wildly different from what came in the box. Here is one of the Gunpla suits with his sort of custom setup and right after Prime. Also, like that pose is all cemented in, so he's really rigid. So you can pick him up and set him down, and his pose never changes. Oh, check this one out. This is wild. So one of the ways that I do like veins and like spit and mucus and stuff like that is I'll take a model and then use a glue gun, kind of like DM Scotty's method, where you texture the model with hot glue, especially these little stretchy tendrils, which for anybody who likes xenomorphs, you got to have the stretchy tendrils in the jaw, right? I mean, that's like a critical component. So that's a pretty wild shot right after the glue went on. Here is hobby insanity. This is when the lizard men came in the mail. Just got this huge box of all lizard men. So you just start unpacking them and cutting the weapons off and cutting the arms off and just working through it. Another close up to these Vietnam guys. This guy, a little blurry close up there. So here you see a final shot of the Xeno Dragon, really up close with an extreme light bulb on here. But again, you can see how far I wanted to take this. So, he's got these extra hoses and this handmade head, and then some tails from extra xenomorphs attached for good measure, and then all the paint and the shading and everything. So really tried to put a lot of effort and detail into each and every piece. Here you see like a sort of slightly better photo, but even just this little bit of focus depth could mess up a photo. So I had to be very careful, but kind of a fun view of maybe these guys being outnumbered. Again, early test. This is when my last dwarf was killed by my by my dragon. So right when I flipped that mini over, I had to take a photo because that was, for me as a game designer, that was a monumentous sort of moment. Monumentous. So here again, we have a close up of the book itself. This is a photo of a page of the book, and you see the tank and some of the forces processed into a painting. And this is really where sort of some of the multidisciplinary aspects of the project really come in, is to get this look. You really don't want what Photoshop does to your photos. It really does a crummy job. So a lot of this is just done by hand. It's just a lot of hand painting and a lot of patience. Here we go with the other battle suit in its final form, with its final paint and final weathering and stuff to match, basically comparing it for match with his little soldiers and feeling cool about it. So you can see this kind of copper color on the miniature here, and that is from washing the entire build with like a miniature shader ink. Here I had my my sort of Vietnam force moving into action, going into a playtest here with a pencil. Oh, and then here I did a really fun one. So if you see in the back, I have this cardboard building, basically. And I wanted to play a scenario where all this little squad had to do was come in and blow this building up, and all these reptoids had to do was stop them. And so instead of a big moving battle, it was basically just, can you kind of get around to the side and get one good bazooka shot on this little building? And will the rules work with that? Will it function, and will it adapt? And then of course you have to go back to the drawing board. You have to rethink things and just keep playing scenarios for weeks at a time to get things to start feeling like they work in a synergistic kind of fun way. Ah, look at that. The finished tank after priming. So did not prime the treads, kept them as rubber black. But wow, really digging that. That's just makes me very happy. That's freaking cool. Just this really short, compact tank with all this cool sci-fi stuff. That was my dream. And there it is. So again, here, these early tests, clearing out and if you didn't notice, this is a little bit funny, but I just primed an entire table. So this whole desk that you see here, I just took it outside and primed the entire surface so that I would get this consistent kind of flat gray color to see and to think against, like a drawing board or a chalkboard. And yeah, metal slugs all the way. Metal slug is my jam. Another one of these sort of Instagram worthy photos of my miniature work that I'm proud of. So this is a close up of the Krell Army, where you can see more of this custom work. Big props too to Dungeons and Lasers for sending me their crazy kit that I tore apart with pliers to make all this stuff. I hope they're getting a kick out of how I use some of this crazy plastic bits. Here's the Krell Army at priming. So early on, I used some of my Viking giant miniatures as bosses to start to experiment with some battles. And again, this is, for me, how I do a lot of my design work, is I just go to the table and start making dice tumble and taking notes. And if something feels neat, I go with it. And if it feels boring or tedious, I cut it, and I just keep going that way. Oh, check this out. The Reptoids at priming. So fun. So you can see like some of the hand sculpted parts, and you can see, yeah, really neat. Just primer is just so cool. So here is a look of what the tank base looked like before I started. So you can see I had to cut out the entire inner ring and really discard the entire tank chassis because it just wasn't working for me, and start building. And so this is kind of that moment. More of these guys. More of this guy. He got photographed a lot. He's pretty fun. Fjarth, the Relentless. More of that extreme lighting scenario that I told you about that really just did not wind up working. The lighting's just too intense, but kind of has a cool like Halloween kind of feel to it. This is one scenario I did where I battled dwarves versus dwarves, just to do a more sort of quote unquote typical war game scenario of just like, 10 soldiers versus 10 soldiers. Looks like a sideways photo, but this is a good one. Here you see some scale between the Sauropods and the Vietnam guys. And you also see over here, this is kind of funny. You can see how many weapons this guy has stacked onto his backpack. Again, to give me the look that I wanted from my stuff. It's some ways a little cartoony, but it's just kind of how I think. Here's these guys just finishing construction before priming. So here you see another one of these single character shots that's super close up that shows some custom work. This is a piece from a magma monster. This is a custom base. And this is a custom weapon here in his hand. And this is his hand is actually kind of cut apart to make this work. And also just trying to show my paint work, which is like not good. But I have my own kind of sloppy style that I go with. And as long as you're consistent across multiple things, it kind of winds up working. And we're coming toward the end now. So this is a close. I really am proud of this one. So much custom modeling involved in this little squad. Right down to like putting weapons from other kits in, and just really neat. Really happy with that. The moment that Fjarth went up against the dragon. Just a fun sense of scale there too. More of this kind of stuff. Scale between miniatures. There's that early paint. That was when I did the interior black, and I wanted to sort of record that because that idea turned out pretty good. You just carefully paint the interior workings of your mecha black to get the outer parts to pop out. There's a blurry photo. More of this Reptoid commander with his big bazooka on his back. There's more of constructing that drivetrain. And here's those legendary tests. Took a lot of photos during that phase of the project because I was wanting to document what I had done. Finished work on this mecha up close and really clear to see. Just love how the aging and the feeling of real metal turned out on this. It looks like a thing that would be on a battlefield, not a sort of a thing in a cartoon. Excuse me. So here you see the base rock creation process up close. So you make your log out of skull. Excuse me. I think I inhaled some coffee. That's how you get the most out of the coffee. You got to inhale it. I snort all my coffee. So you make a log out of Sculpey here and slice it into these kind of odd little coins with a super sharp knife, if possible, and bake them and prime them. Here's another close-up of working on that Xeno Dragon head phase by phase. This is funny. This is a collection of tidbits that I ordered on eBay of here, let me get yeah, tidbits that I ordered on eBay. So I ordered, arms and weapons and guns and stuff. And boy, when you get a big bag of these in the mail, you feel like a crazy, weird, awesome hobby freak. More of the Sauropods, fighting those guys. Here's a sort of a extreme close-up on my dry brushing technique. So you do your dark gray primer and then dry brush your highlights to get them to really pop. This is like one of the Sauropod sort of boss creatures looking crazy. Just added extra legs and extra antennae things and hacked it up and just a mess. So here's like my sort of excuse for rocks with cardboard terrain with the trees next door. Really fun making that stuff. That stuff's just a breeze. One-on-one when I roll a skull and you don't. Here's that other suit with its final look and its final weathering and everything, and kind of easy to see. and get that metallic match between these guys and him. That makes me very happy. Close up on these gas maskers. Here's a close up on the junked stuff with a kind of a photo filter on it for Instagram. But that was years ago doing the junked kit, but it's always fun to pull those models out. So much custom work in those models is still really fun to it's like getting out some of your old favorite toys. There's the finished paint job on the tank with some of the soldiers clustering around. So just one trick, if you guys are doing anything like this that worked well for me, is take a pretty big brush and just get a silver and dry brush silver all over all your green metal. And it'll just catch on the edges and stuff. And you get this very heavy kind of iron look to things. There's that scenario again. You guys are all used to it by now. There's that one sort of before the photo processing. These guys after priming. And here's a funny one. I want to send a shout out to DM Scotty. So years ago, he sent me this awesome Agnar model that he made, this big monster made with a Nerf ball. And early on in my sort of brainstorming process, I was battling an Agnar versus some special forces. You know, that's just kind of where my brain was going. And this photo actually wound up in the book, but just kind of, you know, being crazy and seeing where the imagination takes you. And then finally, it looks like a close-up on those reptoids again. And that, my friends, is it. That is my sort of creative journey of creating Warmaker. So the journey all the way from just sort of getting into things, thinking about it a little bit, getting interested, turning it into a wildly huge craft project that then also parlayed into a book. And, you know, also the book, if you don't want to blow the ducats on the book, you can also just throw down. The PDF is really cheap. And let me know what you think. Just email me directly, hankerin.furnail@gmail.com. And I'm really leaning off of a lot of social media these days as far as Facebook and Twitter, because it's just a sort of bullshit fire hose. So really, if you want to catch up with me and what I'm doing, go over to Instagram, and I'll be on Instagram at hankerin.furnail. So keep up with me there and follow me there to watch what I'm doing. And the more that YouTube continues to suck, we might start even using Instagram as a live platform. We will see what comes next, but it's 2021. So let's move into the future. We got to do all that love, y'all. So take care of your neighbor, be kind to one another, and let's bring the friendliness back into this world and make the world just a little bit better than we found it. Okay. Thank you everybody for tuning in. A happy Friday, happy weekend. And it's kind of nice to have Warmaker, quote unquote, out of my system. It's out there in the world now. And we're going to be moving on to the next chapter. So keep an eye on the old Runehammer. Thanks to all my patrons, by the way. We've seen a lot of new patrons join the Runehammer Patreon recently. You can get everything there is to get over at Runehammer for $1 a month. I mean, that's hard to beat. So come on over there, join our Discord, and catch that kind of daily RPG life that we live. Otherwise, I will see you guys on the internet. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Keep it real. Don't steal. You're always going to get a deal. And with that infinite window, I am out. Talk to y'all soon.